Captain Midnight.
This video is brought to you by GiveWell. Moana 2 is cleaning up at the box office in a way that I, for one, did not expect. Don't get me wrong, I expected it to do well, like I've seen how well that first movie does on the streaming charts even years later. But the biggest global opening of all time for an animated film, that took me off guard. Combine that with Wicked also doing great numbers and Gladiator 2 thrown into the mix, and the box office is really impressive. Encouraging stuff for a theater industry that has made Survive Till 25 its motto this year. So that's what I want to talk about this week, because despite not finding Moana 2 itself all that interesting, I'm definitely fascinated by the impact it could have on Disney and the film industry. So that's kind of the angle I'm taking with this one. Moana 2, Wicked, and what this all means for a film industry in flux. Before I get there, I should mention that we are inching closer and closer to hitting that 700k subscriber number before the end of 2024. Thank you to everyone who subscribes, and if you're not, now might be the time.
Moana's Starlight Canoe. With every pull of the sail and every row of the oar.
So, Moana 2. It would be totally inaccurate to say there hasn't been any hit movies since 2020. Obviously, there has been. Top Gun Maverick, Spider-Man No Way Home, Avatar The Way of Water, the Barbenheimer phenomenon, and more. Now, the last one I listed there is probably the most notable for my purposes because obviously it was two movies, ostensibly serving two different audiences, even if there was a lot of crossover fans for both films. I think that's really important because having a movie for everyone and having a bunch of them do good or even great business at the same time is what the American film industry looked like when it was healthy and in really good shape. When it wasn't just one tentpole doing amazing and then maybe a lower budget horror movie clinging on to a very distant second place. It was a number of movies aimed at different audiences doing well, pulling people into theaters for all kinds of films. I mean, in 2009, rom-coms aimed at older audiences like It's Complicated could do really well in theaters. That same weekend, my teenage self could ignore that and go see Avatar or Sherlock Holmes. Kids could see Alvin and the Chipmunks The Squeakquel, and there were ticket sales enough for everyone if everything went well. Even with Avatar going on to become the biggest hit ever, one movie, and thus one studio, did not dominate the box office, leading to a healthier box office environment for everyone. And that's what I find worth talking about when it comes to this trio of Moana 2, Wicked, and Gladiator 2. That it feels like the rare time in the past few years where movie theaters have successfully ignited that again. Now, I understand that conversations about box office aren't going to interest everyone, and that's totally fine. I think one trap I try not to fall into when discussing it is treating this like a game, which is easy to do with box office numbers. But this isn't sports where at the end of the day what matters is that final score. Tons of good movies have barely made a dent at the box office, and plenty of bad films have done really well. My point here is to not try to use these numbers as a measure of a film's quality, but to talk about the mainstream American film industry as a whole and where these numbers could lead it in the future. Box office definitely doesn't determine whether a new movie from a director I love is good or not, but it sure as hell may determine if they get to direct more movies in the future, and on what scale. So with that long, and probably audience retention tanking digression being said, let's get back to Moana 2. Because I have a lot of thoughts on this one's success. Like I said, I think it's really encouraging that it's part of a trio of movies doing well aimed at different audiences. Beyond that though, I'm very interested to see what this means for the future of Disney. As I'm sure many of you already know, Moana 2 initially started out as a Disney Plus show, Moana the series. And it wasn't until February of 2024 that CEO Bob Iger announced that actually what they had made was now being released as a theatrical sequel, with various episodes being stitched together. Now there's a lot of reasons labor-wise why this is not great. I'll try to include an article about that in the description if you want to read about it, but I don't love what it means for the future of their animated movies generally. We have already seen studios like Pixar play it much safer with their slates, leaning harder and harder on sequels, and that's paid off with Inside Out 2 also being a huge hit this year. But Moana 2, with its somewhat slapdash TV Frankenstein production, show them that even a rushed product like this that feels cheaper than the first film can score big. It makes me wonder if we're going to see Disney re-embrace their 90s and early 2000s model where they were pumping out straight to VHS and DVD sequels to movies like Cinderella and Little Mermaid. For me, it was Aladdin and the King of Thieves. I actually watched that one over and over again as a kid, probably more so than the actual Aladdin. And I think that's a good one to bring up because its predecessor, Return of Jafar, was a huge hit on video, while actually being 5 episodes of the Aladdin animated series stitched together, leading into this whole era of the cheaper sequel. Moana 2 is on a much bigger scale in every way, being a theatrical hit, but it does make me wonder if history is about to repeat itself, with a TV continuation making Disney realize how much more money there is in just quickly pumping out actual sequel movies. If that's what comes out of Moana 2, I don't know if that's a great trend. On the other hand, and maybe this is a reach, feel free to let me know, there may be an upside here. If you, like me, have really disliked the trend of Disney live-action remakes, maybe this is good news. Frankly, they seem to have run out of gas on these things. Little Mermaid was a mild box office letdown for Disney. Peter Pan and Wendy barely seem to move the needle on Disney+. So we'll see how the Mufasa prequel shapes up soon. I do think there's a decent chance that it does just fine over the holiday season. We'll see. I do think it'll really underperform Lion King 2019. And Snow White doesn't seem poised to succeed either. So I think there's a good chance that this quasi-live-action remake train is finally slowing down. Lion King was such a massive hit. People may have forgotten how well that monstrosity did. But these days, I really think the air has slowly let out of that tire. Like Aladdin did well too, but that had a fun angle of, look, it's superstar Will Smith as the genie. I look at some of these recent ones and I'm failing to see what they bring to the table at all. They're just bad movies that look 20 times worse than the animated features that inspired them. And if Moana 2 and Inside Out 2's huge success helps put the nail in that coffin of this cursed subgenre, I'd be more than okay with that. I might end up being wrong there though, and I do have a feeling that Lilo and Stitch next year is going to end up doing extremely well. Regardless of what I think of each of these recent hit movies, you can check out my Gladiator 2 review for my thoughts on that. Anyway, I think overall this three-pronged success of Gladiator 2, Wicked, and Moana 2 is a positive trend. I want lots of movies doing well aimed at different segments of the audience because I want theaters to thrive and manage to keep the lights on. Now I know some people have completely abandoned theaters and have no interest either way in how they're doing, but that's definitely not me. It's still easily my favorite way to see a film, whether it's a big blockbuster like Dune Part 2 or a small indie like the recent A Real Pain. I really value that experience, and I want things that aren't the biggest tentpoles to be able to thrive there, and not just get sent off to the hinterlands of streaming, where they may not get much attention at all, especially if they're not a Netflix Christmas movie. I think these three movies doing so well at the same time shows there is still room in theaters for lots of different kinds of films. Now, I won't pretend that this just means theaters and the film industry as a whole are in a perfect place now. For one thing, all three of these films are still extremely expensive. It's not like one of them burst onto the scene as an indie darling and took everyone by storm. All are sequels or based on popular pre-existing material, and despite their huge success, it's still looking like there's a good chance 2024 will fail to rise to 2019 box office levels. But still, their success at this level was unexpected after a fairly down year in terms of big hits. We'll see how 2025 goes. In terms of big movies, I don't really know how much there is to be excited for. I honestly think it'll take more than a year or two to adjust to the failures that these studios have had in recent years. I've said it before, but changing these companies' directions is like steering a tanker ship. It just won't be fast. But I really hope that by the back half of the 2020s, big movies find a way to consistently wow and engage audiences again. And hopefully, all these recent hits get us somewhere a little closer to that. It is the season of giving, and there are over 1.5 million nonprofit organizations in the US and millions more around the world. It can be tough to know which ones make the biggest impact with your donations. GiveWell was founded to help donors with that exact question. They pore over independent studies and charity data to help donors direct their funds to evidence-backed organizations that are saving and improving lives. GiveWell has now spent over 15 years researching charitable organizations and only directs funding to a few of the highest impact ones. Over 125,000 donors have used GiveWell to donate more than $2 billion. Rigorous evidence suggests that these donations will save over 150,000 people and improve the lives of millions more. They want as many donors as possible to make informed decisions about high-impact giving. That's why you can find all their research and recommendations on their site for free. You can make tax-deductible donations to their recommended funds or charities, and GiveWell doesn't take a cut. Looking through it, I really liked their approach to vitamin A supplements. Through GiveWell, I learned that it costs about $2 to provide vitamin A supplements to a child for a year. This is really important because vitamin A deficiency can increase mortality rates, so vitamin A distribution can save lives by reducing those deficiencies. If you've never donated to GiveWell's recommended charities before, you can have your donation matched up to $100 before the end of the year or as long as matching funds last. To claim your match, go to givewell.org, pick YouTube, and enter Captain Midnight at checkout. Make sure they know you heard about GiveWell from Captain Midnight to get your donation matched. Again, that's givewell.org to donate or find out more.
Here's a special tip for the fellas and girls who have not already joined Captain Midnight's new 1940 Flight Patrol. You'd better hurry up and join at once because there's a big adventure ahead. The thing to do now is to get started because we're going to have not only barrels of fun, but loads of free gifts and prizes too.